Dr. Smith, thank you so very much, and thanks for underscoring the fact that the people are not only resilient, but they have hope, and I think the more we can build on that hope and do whatever tangibly we can do to assist, so there is a matriculation from the current crisis to a better day, the better. And along those lines, I just, maybe if you could, I'm very concerned, and maybe you can elaborate on that, having just been there and seeing, on the ground what's happening. I'll never forget, when Andrew Natsios, when he was head of USAID, and of course he worked for years in the emergency response area, and he made the point, and you said it again when you said how Zimbabwe was a breadbasket, and he too, was beside himself that this breadbasket is, the early warning indicators are that a famine was in the offing, and that starvation and malnutrition was about to go from bad to worse. And I'm wondering if you can give any insights as to the state of play right now, because we know there are some concerns about food insecurity in Zimbabwe, and what is the projected for the next 6 months or so with regards to that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as Mr. Natsios had noted, and as we continue to note, this is a really productive, fertile country. But it is not one with effective production. Its policies have made that certain. Last year, they enjoyed really good rains, and they had pretty good harvests. This year, that has not been the case. And so the forecasts for maize in particular are pretty grim, and there are potentially millions of people in Zimbabwe who may be in need of food assistance.
Are there contingency plans underway at USAID from a disaster assistance point of view?
Yes.
And has the early warning mechanism worked in terms of forecasting what might be needed and when?
I think it has, and I think that we are looking at what they are forecasting, what is described as crisis or stage 3 of 5 levels of food insecurity. So it's a situation in which the international community does have time to respond. And some of the neighboring countries and others can look for support there, but it's very much on our minds.
Now, are we ready, notwithstanding sanctions, because obviously humanitarian aid trumps sanctions, particularly targeted sanctions, are we ready? Do we have sufficient resources to meet that need, working in concert with our international partners?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, yes.
If you could get back, for the record with it,
Yes.
An analysis of what it looks like, just so that we're helpful too on the congressional side, to make sure that we don't get a deja vu with people suffering from that malnutrition. Let me ask you, if I could, about the in September 12, 2013, when you testified, and Ms. Bass and I were very happy to welcome you then, when you provided expert testimony, you made a point that we will not be swayed by the attempts of President Mugabe and his party to blame Zimbabwe's economic misfortunes and disastrous economic mismanagement on the United States and other countries' governments that maintain targeted sanctions on a select group of individuals and entities. Is that still the case? There's a blame game going on, and most importantly, if you could just, for the record again, outline those sanctions, what's in place, how targeted are they, and did you hear appeals to change those sanctions when you were there?
Yes, sir, we did, and our policy does remain largely the same. We have sanctions on fewer than 200 individuals or entities, approximately 106 individuals and 70 entities, and they are intended to be targeted. They are aimed at individuals who have disrupted democracy, engaged in corruption and other acts. The Department of Treasury, the OFAC office, evaluates those situations. The list of individuals itself is considered to be a living, breathing list. You want to examine it periodically. You want to make sure that it is still valid, and that, if there are people who should be removed or entities or added to it, that is part of the process. But, sort of more fundamentally, it remains, the sort of strongest statement, I think, of American values. Does the Zimbabwe government continue to blame their woes on it? Absolutely. They attempt to use it as a propaganda tool. And we discussed these questions with a number of people in Zimbabwe, from the business community to civil society, including human rights activists. And, opinion in Zimbabwe is divided. There's no question. Even among the human rights community, there are some who argue that, well, it's a propaganda tool for the government, so you should consider it. I think in our mind, the government's attempt to use it as a propaganda tool don't change the fundamental reasons for which sanctions were imposed. And so then it becomes incumbent on us to offer a counter-argument, which we have done. There is no better representative of these values and of the American desire to see, the other almost 14 million people in Zimbabwe prosper than our ambassador, Bruce Horton there, who does everything he can to promote economic growth outside of that small section of target sanctions.
In your testimony, you made a disturbing observation that Zimbabwe's opposition has failed to capitalize on the fissures in the ZANU-PF and unite behind a common vision. The opposition has become increasingly splintered. One, could you elaborate on that? What does that look like in terms of splintering? Is it just a multitude of parties? And secondly, and my final question, Amani Countess from the African Regional Program Director for Solidarity Center offers a criticism, and I'd just like to know what your response is to it, that U.S. funding for democracy, human rights, and governance programs in Africa through the U.S. Agency for International Development has been declining despite extraordinary need, down 40% since 2008. And I'm wondering if you could provide some insight into that criticism.
Thank you. Yes, on the question of the opposition, it's a matter of sort of fact and record now that the opposition has been splintering, that the movement for democratic change now has multiple movements for democratic change within it under separate leadership. And some of that is about differences of opinion, about differences of leadership, but I think that what is happening is that there is no sort of unifying message at the moment that stretches across these parties. Certainly young people told us that they were looking for a more unifying message across the opposition, and for a vision of where someone would take their country beyond the partisan questions themselves. Those are differences that are going to play out, and they will, that is up to the people of Zimbabwe and their leaders on how that goes. So I think that for us, it is most important to continue to talk about the broader issues of reform and to continue to support reformers. And the political parties will evolve as they evolve, and we hope that through that process they come forward with a real vision for where they want to take their country. Democracy in governments remains a top priority for the government, for our government, clearly, in Africa and elsewhere. We all know it's a difficult budget environment, and we are all looking for ways to do more. In Zimbabwe, we have exercised that democracy and governance programs through examples such as voter education during the constitutional process, so that people in Zimbabwe understood that as the Constitution was being drafted and voted on, what that meant for their country. Other examples of what we are doing with the money that we do have are, for example, connecting women in agriculture with members of parliament so that they hear their voices and that they understand that. Trying to support civil society in a variety of ways, trying to make sure that those human rights actors have a place to be heard. And so in spite of a difficult budget environment, we're going to continue to try and do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.